operating funding really just isn't available. So this project all in was $85,000, supported completely by donations. And Mass helped us with ideation, and they led the implementation. And Alex Carruthers, who I think is going to come up and speak first, is from TPL and is one of our managers who's responsible for learning and community engagement. So I'm going to just introduce Alex. Come up. Are you coming up to Lori? Yeah. And Lori.
Okay, give us just 1 sec. We're going to get that presentation up.
Started by talking about what KnowYourVoteTO is and why we created it. Basically, it's a website that TPL launched in the lead up to the 2018 municipal election. It's a site where voters could learn about the city council candidates running in their wards, learn about how those candidates thought Toronto should tackle big city issues, and learn more about how decision making happens at City Hall. This was a new service, totally new service for TPL to be providing, but it really fits in our mandate and addresses a real gap. So the library's mission broadly is to preserve and promote universal access to a broad range of human knowledge, experience, information, and ideas in a welcoming and supportive environment. And access to information and the healthy exchange of ideas are really fundamental to our democracy. So supporting engaged citizenship in Toronto is really important to us at the library. Current threats to democracy are really motivating us as well to be more active in this space than ever, and we're tackling this issue on a number of fronts. So for example, last year we launched our On Civil Society programming series, which explores issues like democracy, the media, wellness, urbanism, equality, and security through bringing in experts and having public conversations. Last year as well, Toronto had 2 elections, you'll recall, provincial and municipal, and we wanted to help people get more involved, and we did that a couple different ways. We offered a series of programs on how to run or support a political campaign, like the kind of nitty-gritty, how do you make it happen? And we ran vote pop-ups that modeled the process of voting for youth or for other first-time voters who won't have had that experience before, so kind of demystify what voting's all about. And we're going to be doing that again this year in anticipation of the federal election. Know Your Vote was designed to address a different gap than these were, an information gap. So in 2014, there was a study by Maitrey that says people in Toronto don't vote because they're overwhelmed and uncertain. They don't have the information that they need to make informed decisions. So they don't know who to vote for. And in municipal politics, this is particularly an issue because there's no party platforms to help people get a sense of where the different candidates stand. And city councilor candidates are not really covered in depth by the media. So the library wanted to make a meaningful contribution to the information landscape of the municipal election. And Lori's going to show you how we did it.
So the website is actually still live, and you can all visit it if you're interested in kind of playing around with it later, but I'm going to quickly walk people through the gist of it so that everyone can understand what all of these ideas translated to on an actual web page. So this was our landing page, both on a computer as well as on a phone, and what we really wanted to do was create a fun looking, easy to use, and accessible website that would encourage people to actually come and visit it. And then once people landed on the website, they essentially would enter their address, or they could click on the ward. Yeah, so it was an easy way to find your ward. You could either, if you didn't know which one you were in, you put in your address, and it instantly took you to the next page, which was essentially your ward page, which listed all of the councillor candidates that were running in your ward. Yeah, that'll be easier. And so that looked like this. And so basically we stacked in alphabetical order like you would see on a voting ballot, all of the different candidates. Working with a team of advisors, we had developed 5 different questions that we put to each candidate. And these were the questions. They basically covered broad citywide issues, things like transportation, housing, and taxes. And then we asked them 2 more general questions about their priorities as well, and what specific ward-related issue they wanted to know. And by clicking essentially on a candidate's name, you would drop down and you'd be able to see their answers and quickly compare each candidate's answers to their questions. We also, because Toronto Public Library is about sharing information, created public learning materials in order to accompany this so that people could better understand, what the city actually did about the issues that we asked candidates to talk about. So what is the city responsible for when it comes to housing, mobility, and taxes? And that was one of the assets that we produced. In terms of kind of technical specifications, I know that I'm in front of a crowd of really techie individuals. It's going to become very clear if you ask me any very specific questions that I'm not a very techie person, but I do have the information here of how we did this. So we worked with a full stack developer. We didn't build the website in-house, but with the developer, we used a CMS system that it was called Contentful, in order to create the kind of framework for the website, and then we essentially in-house put in all of the candidates' answers. And one of the things that was really important to us from a tech perspective when we were building this was that we were really cost conscious. We didn't want to build a website that would be A, cumbersome and hard to manage, but B, we wanted to keep the cost of making it low. And what was great about Contentful was that it was free. If you're 10 users or less, it's actually free to use. In terms of the map, to do the ward map, also a very inexpensive tool that we used. We basically used a Mapbox API, which is quite inexpensive. It's based on how many hits it gets, or calls, I believe is the term. And it was about $40 in total that we ended up spending. And we layered that with a GIS map that's provided from the City of Toronto, also free. In terms of staging, we used a free service called Netlify. If you have one user, which we decided to go with, it's free of charge. And we hosted it on Hover, which is a Canadian server that we could work with. And what's really great is that if you're interested in using any of the code, it's also now available for free on the TPL's GitHub. So you can kind of go in and see how it was done and use it as well. Really where the project required a lot more time, energy, and cost was actually in the administration of the project. Our goal was to ensure that every reasonable and fair step was taken to reach out to all councillor candidates, let them know that this was happening, and give them the opportunity to respond. We understood very quickly that if we didn't actually do that, the whole thing would kind of fall apart, right? The whole project hinged on making sure we got everyone to answer questions, but we did so in a way that was equitable to everyone, right? And so to do this, we used a number of different tools. We used MailChimp as our primary communication tool. As you'll probably recall, the 2018 municipal election was quite complicated administratively. There were 48 wards, there were 25 wards, there were 48 wards, there were 25 wards. In total, we ended up having to manage about 300 different councillor candidates at any given time. And MailChimp was a really great way to do that because you can segment out your list and you can see who's opening your emails, but we also included a button in the email where people would click to confirm that they had received it. And that was our way of verifying that people knew about the initiative, so we could reasonably say that if they didn't get it, that they didn't submit an answer, that they at least knew that they could and chose not to. In terms of how we measured security and privacy, we also knew that was another really big concern for us. We wanted to make sure that the answers we were getting were from the candidates themselves, right? We didn't want just somebody answering on behalf of a candidate when it wasn't actually them. And so what we did was we issued a unique token, which was comprised of different numbers and letters to each of the candidates. And they took this token and they input it into a survey, which was on a different platform called Hosted in Canada Surveys. And with this token, they got access to the 5 questions, and then they could answer them, and that's how we verified that it was them. This process took, I think, about 6 weeks of time in order to get all the communications out. We communicated with each candidate at least 3 times, and if they didn't click the button to say that they got it, we phone called them. For those who didn't have emails, we also reached out to them by regular mail to let them know, and that's really where the bulk of the work for this project ended up happening, was really in making sure that we could get all of those candidates aware and get their answers.
So we are very pleased with the results of all of this work. We launched it in September and had 25,000 distinct users, which is a great number, especially for first foray into this kind of service. We got really positive feedbacks from residents, from candidates, from community groups. Other library systems reached out, and media sought us out to report on it. An impressive 72% of city council candidates submitted answers and answered our questions, which really is fantastic and speaks to, I think, the service being valued and respected by candidates. And people were using the site in the way that we hoped. The ward pages and the candidates' responses on them were the most viewed content on the site. And on average, users stayed on those pages for longer than 5 minutes, which shows that we really were capturing their attention. When we map usage of Know Your Vote and compare it to voting turnout patterns from 2014, we can see that take-up was highest in areas with high voter turnout already. So this suggests that the website was used more by people who were already engaged and likely to vote. And perhaps this is not surprising, but it does show us where and in what direction we can grow and expand our civic engagement work. So both the success of Know Your Vote and all of our civic engagement programming and this identification of this area for improvement really prompt us to keep going. As Pam was saying, civic engagement is still very much a priority. We're actually working on our next strategic plan as well, so planning what are we going to do for the next 5 years. Lori and I are going to be sticking around afterwards, and we'd be really happy to chat with anybody who's interested about some of these questions that we want to bring to this group, because we think that you could really help us to sort out and kind of envision what we're doing next. So we want to know, how can the library build on this success to play a greater role in supporting active municipal citizenship and civic dialogue between elections? And how can the library support people who are curious to explore public policy issues but have little experience or comfort doing so? But before we get to that, we're happy to take any questions that you might have.
Do you have anything that indicates how people got to the Know Your Vote sites, or?
Yes, we have relatively good data about that. The most successful traceable way that we got was through social media. So Facebook ended up being one of the most effective ways of capturing people. The other thing that we don't know is that about 30 or 40% of people just actually inputted the website itself, and so I don't know how those people actually found out about the website. We did a number of promotional things, like we made some bookmarks. They might have also clicked it off of the TPL's computers, and so we have a few hunches about how those 30 to 40% of people got there, but otherwise social media ended up being the main way that people were funneled into the website.
Did you do any real-world problem solving with school classes?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand your question.
Did you engage teachers in their classrooms in getting involved?
To promote?
Yeah.
No, we didn't. I think we imagined the audience of this as being, adults and like young adults, so people who wouldn't be like in a high school. But we did have, we did a lot of outreach to youth to kind of teach them about voting and vote pop-ups, and we had some representatives from the U of T on our advisory council.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I am also working on a project which I'll pitch later tonight on civic literacy, so I did take quite a bit away. So I read a little bit more about what you do on the website, and you talk about having a independent external advisory committee of a selected group of people or a shortlisted group of people who help to kind of parse out the main questions you wanted to pose to candidates. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you selected this final committee to advise you on what issues are most important to you, and maybe also in connection to any youth engagement as well.
So in terms of the advisory committee, we ended up with an advisory committee of 5 people. The thinking that went behind it was that we wanted to make sure we were capturing different voices and perspectives in the city, and also accounting for different political leanings, actually, right? We wanted to make sure that any question that we asked would be perceived as fair and relatively unbiased. And we also wanted to make sure that our learning materials as well weren't going to skew in either direction. So those were kind of the main criteria. We ended up working with people from, like U of T was mentioned, someone from Civic Action was also on the committee. We also had somebody, I'm blanking on everyone right now, I can call their names. We also had a former, somebody who had ran in the provincial elections as well, to give us perspective about what it would be like to receive this kind of request. And so those were the types of questions that we wanted to kind of get better perspective on, was to really just, figure out how different people from different walks of life would perceive the questions and also perceive the learning materials, so we could, make sure we were doing a good job of balancing everything.
And the other part of the question was about youth engagement?
Or young adults.
Young adults. We really did do quite a bit of youth engagement, but not tied to this project. So our civic engagement work tied to, was in some cases even led by our youth advisory groups. So we have a number of youth advisory groups, youth-led kind of advisory groups across the city. We've got 100 branches, and I think we've got something like 56, thank you, youth advisory groups, and 2 of them took the lead on vote pop-ups. And so set them up and ran them and promoted them to their peers, and I think we had over 100 youth voting and learning how to vote for the first time through our vote pop-up program.
Hi, I was interested in, given that most of the candidates are people that have already sat in the council for 2 or more terms, I wondered if you thought at all about how you might integrate existing voting records and existing stances on things, because that's arguably more valuable in some ways than what they promised in the campaign. And I guess to that, you said 72% of candidates responded. Was that majority of people, was that a higher percentage of new candidates rather than ones that maybe felt their incumbents and were more confident they didn't need perhaps to be as talking about their position?
Great questions. So in terms of the 72, we didn't actually notice that there was a big gap between people who had already been elected and those who, like incumbents and essentially newcomers. We think that a lot of that had to do with the fact that we went from 48 to 25 wards, and so it actually pitted incumbent against incumbents, right? So there was actually some pretty tight races in many different areas. In terms of comparing with already existing voting records, there is a tool that already exists out there, and so we didn't want to replicate something that's already been done, but it's definitely, I think, an interesting thing for us to consider in terms of moving forward. Sure.
Great presentation, by the way. Oh, okay, there we go. Great presentation, thank you very much, and I take a lot from the feedback because I worked with, briefly worked with Civic Waterloo region, and I'm wondering if you have reached out to any other municipalities that have done a similar project like Flyer Votes. Just so you can now you have the downtime to do that kind of exchange in terms of your knowledge and awareness.
I know that you did some looking around in advance, which we can talk about, but I'll also say that a couple different municipalities have reached out to us, so public libraries in particular have reached out to us to learn more about the code and how they can implement it. Yeah, but I think that's always a great idea, is when you're trying to think about what can we do next.
Yeah, because it already exists, and since you both have your own codes and they have their own GitHub code, of course it's open.
What
It's
is
just, sorry.
What's the name of the
It's,
project that you just
it's
said?
Why Our Vote, and it's, with Civic Tech Waterloo Region, so if you reach directly to them.
Thanks.
No worries.
Did you wanna talk about who we looked at before?
Yes, in terms of who we looked at beforehand, there were three major places that we looked. So Vancouver does a similar initiative, but theirs is embedded in candidates submitting their candidacy. And so theirs is just an online PDF that they produce where people can just kind of state their platform, but we looked at their policies around how they collected information, what they allowed to publish, and all this kind of stuff to inform. And we also looked at their response rate as well to get a sense of what we could expect. There's also a state in the US that has done it, which we looked at. And there was a former project here in Toronto that also did it, and we reached out to them. They did it in the 2014 election to talk to them about their experience and to learn kind of what lessons they had learned so that we didn't replicate them.
The same, issues.
I think we have time for 2 more questions.
Thanks for your presentation. Question, how does educating on electoral reform factor into your strategic plan? There was a mention about voting record in the past, and there's been at the federal level and also at the provincial and municipal level discussion on changing the voting system. A lot of people, especially newcomers, might not even understand what the current system is. So are there plans in the strategic plan to educate on that, what the current system is, and what groups like Fair Vote Canada might be proposing, and maybe partner with them as well?
That's a super interesting question. I would say there's not specific plans, but when we are thinking right now about, we're putting together a plan for how we're gonna support civic engagement for the federal election in particular. And we have a service sector for diversity and inclusion. We do a lot of work with newcomers, settlement partnership, and we're thinking about them as kind of key partners in kind of voting education and civic literacy. I'm gonna borrow that word from you. Because you're totally right, there's this lack of, there's so many different ways to vote and so many different ways it can be organized. It's important for people to understand that. Yeah.
Thanks. I'm really interested in the partnership and like how you work together. Is this the first time that the library and SLP work together, or and like how did that come together?
I think this is the first time that we worked together. I think it was just, we learned about the exciting stuff that they were doing, and we wanted to learn from them and work with them and figure out what we could do together. We have a lot of the same goals. Yeah, I don't know, Pam, if there's anything else you would add to that.
Did the project come first or the partnership come first?
Hi, the idea to work together, and are you asking me? Sorry, how are you? The idea to work together, using, wanting to draw on their expertise in terms of civic engagement and democratic process, and trying to find things that we could work on together to our goal to start developing some programs around civic engagement. So this was the first one that came to be, but we're certainly talking about other things that we're going to work on.
From our perspective, we were just very excited to work with the Toronto Public Library.